Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome again to Syriana Analysis. Today, I'm joined by Thomas Fazi. He's a journalist and columnist at The Unheard and Compact Mag. He is recently co-authored a book called The COVID Consensus, which I believe is a critique from a left-wing perspective of the global assault on democracy and the poor. Thomas, welcome on Syriana Analysis. Before we jump into our main topic today, which is Ukraine, I would like you to speak a little bit about your new book, which you co-authored for the people to know what is it about and where do they find if they're interested to buy your book.
Okay, well, hi Kevork, and hi to everyone watching and listening to us. It's a real pleasure to be here. So thanks a lot for that. This is the latest book, my latest book, which I co-wrote with Toby Green, who's a British historian, and as it says in the subtitle, it's a critique from the left of the COVID management policies and COVID regime of the past 3 years. And, Toby and I were compelled to write the book largely kind of out of our surprise at most of the left's support for what we considered to be policies that were overwhelmingly hurting the weakest people in society, the working classes, and especially poor people in the developing world as a result of lockdowns, and that more in general entailed extremely authoritarian policies, which which certainly we don't think have much to do with what the left used to stand for. Though, of course, we know that today the left is quite a different beast from what it was even just 20 years ago when I got involved in left-wing politics. But that's another story. Anyway, if anyone's interested in reading I would say a pretty original, we think, analysis of what happened, get hold of the book. And, if anyone on the left has been feeling maybe a bit crazy the past few years, in maybe feeling that they didn't approve what was happening, but didn't feel like they could openly say so because out of fear of being called out as racist, fascist,
Welcome to the club.
just for criticizing these policies, then I think this book might be for you. But I mean, and if you're not on the left, I think you'll definitely like this book because we know that most of the critiques have come from the right, so we just wanted to counterbalance that.
I grew up my entire life in a left-wing family. I used to identify myself as a left-wing anti-imperialist person for a very long time, but right now I don't find myself a place in the left, especially in the West. I would say in the Arabic world, there's still fractions of some left-wing groups still active, but mostly are being swallowed by Qatar and other oil-rich countries as well. And today, I'm just saying this with the pain in my chest because I was also called the fascist and neo-Nazi and all this stuff. It's so crazy how it's easy nowadays to call people names.
Yeah,
and one of the issues nowadays that is very important and it affects the people and the left cannot stop it is Ukraine. And you wrote a very interesting thread on this issue. Guys, the link for his book, his Substack, Twitter, and the thread all in the description below. Since the eruption of the war in February 2022, or let's say the hot war in February 2022, NATO countries urged the rest of the world to provide military assistance for Ukraine and to sanction Russia in order to isolate the latter, right? Now, fast forward to March 2023, has NATO policy worked in your opinion? And if not, then why?
Well, obviously not. In very basic terms, no country outside of NATO and a few other countries that are directly under the US sphere of influence, which in many cases involves a significant military presence, i.e., some form of military occupation, especially in in the countries that were defeated in World War II in Europe, I can't. I live and I come from Italy, so I know something about that. We've been living with a significant U.S. military presence, which involves some of the most important U.S. Military bases in Europe. So one could argue that kind of limits the the sovereignty and autonomy of my country as well as of other countries. But I mean, I think the fundamental piece of info that people should realize is what I just said. That basically, aside from NATO and Australia and South Korea and Japan, that's pretty much it. Hardly any country has joined the West in sanctioning Russia, and even less so in providing military aid to Ukraine. So clearly, it's been a failure. If the aim was to bring the world on board with sanctions and with military aid to Ukraine, with the openly stated aim at the start of the conflict of isolating Russia. That was clearly the West's aim, and I think a year on we can say that that's been a catastrophic failure from the West's perspective. Not only have countries not joined the West in this proxy war, but in fact, a lot of countries, including some of the largest and most important non-Western countries in the world, not only China, obviously, but also India and South Africa and Turkey and other countries, which alone account for more than half of the world's population, have in fact strengthened ties with Russia economically and politically, and in some cases even militarily. So complete failure of the Western strategy, and that's not even going into what's actually happening on the ground in Ukraine. And I think it's pretty obvious to everyone that the war isn't going well for Ukraine and or NATO. And in terms of why this happened, I think there are a number of reasons. I think there's a first point, which is that countries quite simply aren't willing to sacrifice their economic or national interests for what they understand fully well to be a proxy war, a proxy conflict between the West and Russia. And so they know fully well that this has nothing to do with defending sovereignty or freedom or the territorial integrity of Ukraine or democracy or the rule of law or any of these nice words and slogans that the US and the West like to throw around. The countries of the world know perfectly well that the US and the West more in general have constantly violated all these principles throughout their entire histories, basically. Indeed, if we look at the US, anyone with a basic knowledge of history, and definitely non-Western countries, most of which have been on the receiving end of US imperialism and colonialism and then neocolonialism, they understand fully well that in fact the US has violated these principles more than any other country in the world, throughout its relatively short history, in fact. And so on a very basic level, I think there's an element of economic and national self-interest in countries not joining this proxy war. So this motivation we may consider kind of non-ideological. So there's a basic kind of economic self-interest that countries are following. But of course, I think that there's a layer on top of that, and that is an ideological layer, and is that most countries have very profound grievances against the West, and which most Westerners don't seem to be cognizant of. They're not aware. They don't seem to be aware of this. They don't seem to realize just how pissed the world is at the West. The fact is that the world knows that we've been using mafia-style tactics to keep our grip on the world.
At some point, they don't care as well. Like I know a politician here in Germany. He is from the center-right Free Democratic Party, and he told me, I personally know what the United States has done to your region. I personally know what the United States has done throughout, let's say, the last few decades. I know how many million people perish and everything, but it was far away from Germany. We don't care what's happening to the rest of the world. But now this is about Ukraine. This is close to Europe, and we want to defend the European collective security or European collective values that they're still repeating of. But one of the consequences of NATO's isolation attempts against Russia is the emergence of the Russian-Chinese pact, if it's true to call it a pact, which aims at weakening the West's dominance in global affairs. Do you think closer relations between Moscow and Beijing will definitely lead to a multipolar world, or does the West still enjoys the economic and military powers to stop this shift and the shift to a multipolar world?
No, I think this shift has already happened. In fact, I would argue that this multipolar world we've all been talking about and hoping for in some cases has become a reality. And of course, we know that it's a trend that's been, there have been undercurrents, pushing in that direction for a very long time. Which obviously relate to China's economic rise and its increasing ties with the rest of the world and its increasing influence. But it's not just about China; it's also about the rise of other regional powers, India, Brazil. So this is Turkey, of course. So this is a much bigger game, and it's not all about China. And so these shifts have been ongoing for some time. But I think it's pretty clear that the Ukraine war, somewhat paradoxically, from at least the West's perspective, has given a huge acceleration to this trend, and in fact has led to this new order to emerge, really. And we see that in what is an increasingly explicit alliance between Russia and China, which in itself is hugely significant, because it signals the rise of a new Eurasian alliance that, it's clearly looking east, not west. But it's about much more than that. It's about this is a shift that it relates to what I was saying earlier. It's a shift that a lot of countries clearly were waiting for and were hoping for. And I think it relates to just how much countries felt that the previous US-led unipolar order was oppressive and unjust. And I think that's why most countries are positively embracing this new order, and we see that in increasing talks and increasing collaboration between China and the Middle East, for example, but also other Arab countries and Latin American countries, and which are also increasingly engaging in increasingly autonomous policies, even independent from China. So it's not, as I said earlier, it's not all about China. And so I think a lot of countries, and this is the ideological element that I didn't, get to mention earlier, and that is that a lot of countries, precisely because they understand that this conflict is also about, the future of the world order. I think a lot of countries are more or less explicitly siding with Russia because they realize that a NATO defeat in this war will significantly weaken US power in the world, which is something that most countries see as a positive development. I'm sorry for my fellow Western friends that are always very upset when I say this, but that's just a fact which can be easily seen just talking to a lot of people.
And actually,
outside
the rest
of
of the
West.
world, in my understanding, they just want to share, like to be part. They don't want to exclude the West from the multipolar world, because the multipolar world means also the West is part of it, right? So it would be different poles and different, let's say, centers of power that can manage the global affairs in a way that could bring more justice to the people. Like you're not going to work in your entire lifetime and then the US comes and bombs the hell out of your street or neighborhood because they want to topple a government or a regime. They call it because they want to spread democracy, right, in these countries. So lots of people argue that in the Middle East, North Africa, or in southern countries, like, yeah, it's illegal what Russia did. It's invasion of Ukraine. It violates the territorial integrity of the Ukrainian sovereign state. But why would I care? Like, I was a victim for the same crimes for many decades, and no international law or international body tried to bring justice to me, right? And there was no arrest warrant by the ICC against any of these politicians who committed these war crimes. So for them, it's also it's like, why would I care as someone that was suffering from these policies for very long?
Sure, it's also taking a stand against Western hypocrisy and double standards. Absolutely, that relates to the ideological element I spoke about earlier. This is also about it's taking a stand against the West. That I think to me that's pretty clear. But of course, as you were saying, it's not a multipolar world. A multipolar world is not it's not an anti-Western project. It's the West that sees it that way, that sees any threat to its hegemony as a threat to its very survival, to its as an existential threat. But that's just because the West can't conceive of a world in which power and wealth is more evenly distributed. And I think there's no reason to believe, from my point of view, that China wants to take the U.S.'s place as the world's imperial hegemon. This is the Chinese Chinese thinking and Chinese policy on this issue has been, I think, very consistent over the past decades, and I think there's no reason to believe that they want to replace the U.S. as the power that imposes its own model on the rest of the world, which is what most people fear. But I think that's not the case, because they also see that entails costs. They also see that the U.S. was a unipolar hyperpower for a few decades, but now it's also paying the price for that, in terms of the political backlash, the economic backlash, and also economic damage that has caused to the US's own economy in terms of deindustrialization and so on, because being, for example, the world's almost sole reserve currency has costs, and I think the US is paying the price for that now. And so they don't want to take that same road.
Let's say, the public reputation of the United States, the policies itself. So China doesn't want to to repeat the same mistakes. But China nowadays, for example, Xi Jinping was in Moscow, and he tried to reactivate or revive diplomacy. But the NATO side, on the other hand, says that China is increasingly embedding itself on the side of Russia in the proxy war in Ukraine. How do we expect Xi Jinping to be a neutral mediator in this regard?
Well, no one expects him to be neutral. That's not the point. The point in this specific issue is not that China clearly stands with Russia more than it stands with the US. Is that the China stands for peace? I think this is in a diplomatic process. This is what counts. Whether the actors involved are sincere about wanting to reach a peace agreement or not. And I think what's clear is that China truly wants peace. Again, not for some grand humanitarian reason, but because it realizes that it's in its own interest, and in fact in the world's interest, for this conflict to end, in a peaceful manner, because the alternative is almost impossible to conceive of. And I think this is again something that's tarnishing the US's reputation, in the sense that it's pretty. I mean, what does the US think what does the US think? Other countries think when they see the US say, "Oh, it's unacceptable for China to want to broker peace in Ukraine." Clearly, most countries are going to think the US is crazy, and that the US wants the conflict to go on, which I think is in fact true. And so, again, I think this inevitably will bolster China's, China's role as a deal maker and as a peacemaker in world affairs. as it has proven to be, for example, in the Middle East, in the signing of the historic, Iran, Saudi Arabia deal, which is likely to put an end to the 9-year-long war in Yemen, which the US has in fact been actively supporting for most of that time. And it's increasingly going to make the US, it's increasingly going to make countries view the US as really an unhinged country, a country that's kind of lost it, and that is really ready for almost anything. And will sacrifice almost anyone and anything to remain, to preserve what's left of its power, even going as far as bombing its own allies, as it's pretty clear it did in the case of the Nord Stream gas line. So I think, countries and people around the world are very, very concerned by the, by what's happening in the US, and I think there's big fears that the US at this point will stop at nothing to stop any, to prevent any threat to its, already
it gives the
declining
impression that
hegemony.
it's a rogue state in the United States, even goes further to bombing an infrastructure that belongs to its ally, Germany. And here the politicians in Berlin, they don't dare to say anything in this regard. But Washington, for example, they ridicule not only these allegations, but the allegations of the Chinese side. China believes that if NATO wins in Ukraine and eventually against Russia, the next door NATO will knock are in China. In your estimation, is the Chinese concern justified, or it's exaggerated in this regard? And can NATO really wage similar warfare against China if they succeed in Ukraine?
Well, I mean, I think it's not about whether NATO and the US are going to go and knock on China's door if they win in Ukraine. They already are knocking at China's door in the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, we know, China, the US has been encircling China in an increasingly aggressive manner. It's just all one has to do is look at the map of US bases in the Pacific to realize just to what extent China has been already encircled, as Xi Jinping said in an unusually blunt statement a few weeks ago, by the US. Anyone can see that the US is trying to stoke tensions in Taiwan. I think it's pretty clear that, the US almost wants to pull off a kind of Ukraine 2.0 in Taiwan. I mean, it's exactly, it's a very similar strategy to the one they employed in Ukraine, and so you provide more and more political and military support to that country in the hope of provoking a reaction from the from the country you're hoping to engage in a proxy conflict with, in this case China, so that you can paint them as the bad guys. Luckily, it seems like Taiwan isn't playing along with this game, so that's a
Ukraine for them is like an open book all of us, to learn.
Yeah, I think no. I think we've seen quite a change of tune in Taiwan since in the past year, and I think it's not a coincidence. I think they really are looking at what's happening in Ukraine and being like, we don't want to end up like them, and so I think it's of course it's a very it's a justified concern, because the US is already knocking at China's door. It's already threatening China with military action. It's already in its official national security and defense documents describing China as an existential threat to the US. And I think anyone reading the news can see that the US is trying to ramp up tensions with China. And clearly there's a part of the US establishment that wants to go to war with China, and maybe thinks they can even win that war. But I think this points to what I was saying earlier, to just how unhinged elements of the US military-industrial complex have become, because it's any serious military analyst will say that that there's very little chances that the US can actually win a shooting war with China in the Pacific or in the South China Sea. I think most military analysts will tell you that China clearly has a massive advantage. And besides, it's also a conflict that China has been preparing to defend against for quite some time. And so it's, I don't think China has any interest, as the US says, in starting this war by, for example, invading Taiwan, which would make no sense from a military or political or even economic perspective. But I think it is ready to defend itself from what it sees as a very real threat of a US rogue, as you said earlier, rogue action in the in its region. So I think the threat is very real, and I think other countries view that to be the case as well, which is why they countries are more or less openly or more or less explicitly hoping for a NATO defeat, because they realize that a NATO victory would further embolden the US. That said, I mean, the China front is already open, and I think that just tells you how crazy they've become. I mean, not only are they, while they're failing Ukraine, they've already opened a new front in
the thing is,
China.
I think from the Taiwanese side, they also clearly see that the United States isn't ready to defend its allies personally or directly. They're just using tens of thousands, I would say, soldiers from the Ukrainian side as a meat grinder in this conflict, and the military assistance itself isn't enough to fight against the Russian side. If the United States isn't ready to defend its allies directly, then what's the point of doing the fighting for the United States? But the other side, this is something that caught my attention since the start of this war in 2022, that the Chinese and the Russian side, they are increasingly using an anti-imperialist language officially, like diplomats, politicians, when they address the U.S. foreign policy. Is it this language meant to send a message to the oppressed people worldwide by the U.S. imperialism? And do you think it's an efficient approach?
Yes, I think it is. I think it is because there's an element of truth to it. The construction of a multipolar order is in itself an anti-imperialist struggle. It's a struggle against the American empire. So it is de facto an anti-imperialist struggle, whether regardless of the views that one holds, about the issue. I mean, it's in effect an anti-imperialist struggle, and I think a lot of countries do see it that way. And I think just look at how over the course of the past year we've seen so many countries becoming very emboldened in their relations, in their manner, even in their manner of speech with their Western counterparts. I think many of us have seen the videos of the president of that African country, whose name I can't remember now, standing up. This was the guy that stood up to Macron, basically accusing Macron of or telling Macron that he had no role or no right to tell African countries what to do, and that they were, and it was an extraordinary speech, because it's the first time that I've seen an African leader speak.
He's the president of Congo
in that tone.
Yeah.
President of Congo, exactly. Everyone should Google that video if they haven't seen it yet. But there are similar events that we're seeing lately. There was a similar interaction between another African leader, and I think it was the German. Was he the? No, it wasn't the foreign minister, but it was an important German minister, yes. And that was about China, and it was this African leader basically telling him, why you guys are worried about Chinese influence in our countries, but maybe you should worry about the very, very negative influence that you have had over our countries for centuries. You don't worry about China.
I want to play this video just for a second for the people to know what you're talking about.
Sure, yeah, go for it, yeah.
تعاون مع فرنسا وأوروبا أن تنظروا بشكل مختلف إلى أفريقيا وأن تحترمونا، وليس أن تنظروا إلينا بلهجة أبوية ونحن المخطئين وأنتم.
Look at the applause there.
Astonishing speech. I mean, I think this is these are historic. I mean, this points to this, that what's happening is something much, much bigger than just China. It's that countries now feel that they, the West and America are weak enough, and that they've got their backs covered sufficiently to finally be able to tell the West what they've been wanting to tell us for a very long time. And again, you know, there are several, exchanges of this kind that we've seen, even just in recent weeks. And so, you know, it's, as I said earlier, I think a lot of countries do see they do view the construction of a multipolar order in anti-imperialist terms. Absolutely. And so I think it makes it makes a lot of sense for China and Russia to use that language, because I think there's an element of truth in there. And I think that's, you know, it doesn't matter what I think, but what counts is that clearly a lot of the countries around the world, especially I would say African countries, but not only African countries. I mean, you can clearly sense that feeling in the way India, speaks about Ukraine, in the way that, but I mean, it's very evident in Africa. And I think it also relates, of course, to, there's also historical reasons for that. I mean, the African countries, in Africa, the Soviet Union has historically played an anti-imperialist role, an anti-colonial role, vis-a-vis the West, which instead clearly was the colony.
This is the,
the Namibian president.
Before I play this video, I will also mention something that happened recently. The foreign ministry of Germany, they posted something about Africa on Twitter, and they apparently they didn't have enough space to write Africa, and they used the emoji, the leopard emoji, to describe Africa on Twitter, and they got a huge backlash by African diplomats and politicians on Twitter. And this is coming from the Green Party, because the Greens are in charge of the foreign ministry here, and they are the ones who call everyone fascist, everyone is racist, everyone that comes a little bit right of their ideology is fascist. But they're using an emoji of a leopard to describe the entire continent there. But I will play this video and then we end up this conversation.
Whereas in Namibia, for example, in the meantime is 4 times as much as, for example, the German community. And it's so far, it's not precisely the same what takes place all over the world. There are differences. And what I'm...
Mr. Speaker, what is your problem? Why does it become your problem? It looks like it's a more European problem than our problem.
Yeah.
You are so sorry for us. I don't see Chinese will never come and play around here. Germans not allowed.
Look at the bravado.
Germans are doing that.
It's as if they've been about Chinese decades.
We allow Germans to come offer visas here. Red carpet. Our people are harassed in Germany. Even diplomatic passport holders in Germany. And you come in here, Germans come in here as they want. So why Chinese talk about Germans? How you are treating us there? Chinese don't treat us like that. Diplomatic passport, we will handle our own country. Don't be sorry for us.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Every time Westerner comes, it's about Chinese.
In African culture,
I love the
Middle
laugh.
Eastern culture, even when the politicians, they don't put leg over legs when they're meeting someone, and you see how he was, like, the African leader was putting leg over leg in front of the German ambassador in a sign of disrespect to him, and yes,
no, I mean the body language spoke volumes. Absolutely, and the chuckle at the end, and so I think, but we have to. So I think these videos, I think these exchanges maybe tell us more than hundreds of pages of, deep geopolitical analysis. I mean, these videos tell us all we need to know about what's happening. This is also an anti-Western revolt. It is. And I think we, the sooner we acknowledge that, the sooner we can, embrace in a positive way this new world order in which, hopefully every country can thrive, and of course in which the West can thrive as well, because as the Namibian president said, don't worry about us. I think he was right. Europe, Westerners and Europeans in particular should be very concerned about the future of not just Western democracy, that's pretty much gone already, but the Western prosperity, which is also rapidly falling. So I think the others, I mean, they've got everything, and this also answers your previous question. The non-Western bloc, they've got everything they need. They've got the natural resources, and now they've got the technological means, and they've got the workforce. They've got everything they need to thrive. We're the ones that are at serious risk of decline.
Yeah, I think Europe should worry the most in this regard, especially after the blast of the Nord Stream pipelines, and they should worry about the next winter. And Simon Hirsch warned about it in his last interview on a Chinese TV. And let's see what's going to happen here. The prices are skyrocketing. It's crazy. Sometimes it's unaffordable. We are trying to minimize our purchases and everything, but for me, I don't see a good end for this. And I try to warn my German friends, because I truly care about Germany. I love this country that it has given me an opportunity to live here and work here and work, for example. So I want to see the best for this country, and I try to warn. And I think it was Kissinger or Brzezinski who said it may be dangerous to be America's friend, but to be America's enemy is dangerous, but to be America's friend is fatal. Thomas Fazi, thank you very much for being my guest. It was a really pleasure talking to you. Guys, his Twitter account, Substack, the book, everything are in the description below. If you want to purchase his book, please do it, and I will definitely have you again. Thank you so much. Guys, if you want to spread the word, please share this video on your social media accounts, and also become a patron to support my independent work. And see you next time.